Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. And well, we are back in the world of CBGM today. It's CoachFury here, of course, to try and break down the first round prospects. You may recall in the last video that we loaded up about the draft in the CBGM, we talked a little bit about second round prospects, undrafted players who I felt were probably maybe going a little bit too early, didn't have enough skills, possibly might not make a pro career out of it. Well, today, as I said, we are going into the first round. These are guys who are going to be guaranteed contracts for 3 or 4 years and are essentially going to be playing in the Pro League for the NBGM. So let's get straight into it, really. For those of you who didn't watch the previous episode, here's some of the assumptions that I do make with the draft. So obviously I'm recording this at the time. We haven't had the national tournaments. We haven't even finished all the conference tournaments yet. So obviously there's a factor that we don't have that sort of tournament flavour really to add to this. But in terms of how I pick the players here and how I pick the prospects, there's a couple of things really to note. First one is that I make the assumption that freshmen have more of a potential factor over the senior players who are going into the draft, simply because that's what we tend to see when we look at the pro game of Draft Day Sports Pro Basketball 21, and when we look at it in real life. Freshmen tend to be seen as players who have higher potential. Seniors seem to be more rounded players, but possibly not have that ceiling that a freshman would have. So we're making that same assumption here. Other things that we're thinking about is that for me personally, I like shooting, I like size, and I like position-based skills. So what does that mean? Well, essentially, it means if you're a 6'6" centre in the CBGM, in the college league, then you're pretty much going to be limited to playing the guard or some of the wing positions, really. So it means you have to have skill sets for those positions. And it also means that, for me, I want good shooting. So, you know, if you are going to be playing at the guard or wing position, you've got to have a three-point shot in the pro game. If you're playing centre, even, you have to have a three-point shot potentially now as well in some systems. But, you know, you can get away with that. So what that means is essentially, you know, for point guards, I want handling, passing, bit of scoring, but IQ and, you know, general discipline as well there. Wings, you're looking for good shooting inside out, look a bit of defense, bit of stealing, mixture of those. And then front court, you're obviously looking for good defense, good rebounding, shot blocking ability, etc., as well as a good inside shot. So we're taking that into account. That's the things that I like to pick when I draft. So that I'm looking at it from the prospect of me being a pro player. You know, for those of you who watch my channel, we do delve into the pro league. So we're taking it from that perspective of what I would draft. So, you know, take that into consideration. The AI might not necessarily like the same things that I like. I guess other things to think about is that we are assuming here that, you know, it's not just CBGM draftees that are going into this draft. I mean, for this purpose of this video, I've done a top. Let me double check actually. What have I done? I believe I've done a top 30 or so, top 25. But, you know, I've factored in the fact that, you know, we have to make the assumption that 4 or 5 international players will probably come in each round. 4 to 5 G League players will enter the draft as well. So the G League showcase players. For those of you who are following the CBGM along, you will have seen that there's a guy who's just putting up phenomenal numbers in the G League who will probably likely be a top 5 prospect. But, you know, for this, we've not really factored that in because we have no sight of that. So we are purely looking at just the CBGM players. And then the other things to think about is that I'm assuming there's some kind of logical correlation between the CBGM and the Draft Day Sports College Basketball 21 ratings versus the pro ratings. You know, it's not a pure 1 to 100, but then 1 to 100 in each. So if you have a 74 inside shot in the college game, you won't have a 74 inside shot in the pro game. So we're kind of making a bit of a wild assumption there, but that's the best we can do. So we're kind of assuming, for example, if someone is a 99 outside scorer, they're going to be a good outside scorer, or at least an okay outside scorer. So we're kind of making that assumption here. And then the final thing that just to note really is I've had no sight of any of the NBGM mocks or the in-game pro ratings. So, you know, I haven't seen any of that. So this is purely based on my own opinion. Could be wildly wrong. Who knows? But based on how the AI goes against what some of the things I like, we're probably going to be vastly different when it comes to this when the official mock comes out. But let's dive straight into it then, shall we? And look at the first round. So first up, we've got the late first round prospects. And I guess first on the block, we have Andre Sanders, who is a interesting prospect. I guess he makes the bottom end of the first round for me, purely because I think his discipline and court IQ is going to kind of let him down, and that inability of a really good outside shot. I think he is going to be a very good player, though. Don't assume based on the fact that he's going to probably be around in sort of the bottom half of the first round, he's not going to be a good player. I think that Andre Sanders could be a bit of a steal in this draft. I really like his defensive ability. I really like the fact he can rebound, he can score, he can pass, he can play good defense. I just think that one of the things that I would like to have seen is a bit more drawing fouls and a little bit more of an outside shot. If he literally, honestly, if he'd have had an outside shot within the 70 range and a drawing foul within the 35 range, that's how tight I think it is, and possibly a discipline of plus 50, he'd have been a top 15 pick in my opinion. That's how the margins we are working with some of this. So that, given the fact he's a senior, as I mentioned, his potential is probably slightly lower. So that's why, for me, he makes the bottom end of the first round. So we move on to the next prospect, which is Ronnie Shields. So Ronnie Shields, a sophomore who's entering the draft. Really interesting prospect. For me, on paper, has some really good positives. He has a good outside shot. He can rebound phenomenally well for someone who's 6'2", can steal the ball, which kind of makes up for that average defense that he's showing. The only thing that I have against him really is his size. He's 6'2", so he's going to be limited to the backcourt positions. And with that court IQ, discipline, and ball handling ability, I question how effective he would be in the pro game, which kind of means that he drops down from probably a mid to 20s pick to a late first round pick, in my opinion. I think he could be a very good sixth man in the pro league if he's using the right system. Guy who comes in against the bench, puts up numbers, can do it at a pretty good rate. I mean, his shooting numbers need to improve a little bit, but I feel that's where he could be. That sort of like impact sort of guard who just, you can give him the ball and he can try and get a shot for you, get some buckets for you in that rotation. So we move on to Richard Brown. So Richard Brown is probably the interesting one that a lot of people will probably think will be going higher in this draft. And well, on paper, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, you look at these ratings: 100 inside shot, 89 scoring, great rebounding, draws fouls like an absolute madman. Defense is a bit suspect. Discipline is so good. 90 discipline is something I really value discipline in the pro game. Just keeps the guys on the court, stops them being stupid with foul trouble. However, his court IQ is probably what's going to let him down there. But the reverse of that, so if you look at him on paper, you don't consider he's anything else. You look at his shooting numbers, look at his ratings, think, yeah, really, really good player. However, he's 6'6", has no outside shot, so that means he's going to be limited to probably being in a small ball lineup, probably playing the 4. To be honest, I would never put him as a small forward, and that court IQ is going to be an issue. Ball handling is going to be an issue, so you can't put him as small forward because he has no outside shot and he has no ball handling ability. So that for me is why he'll drop. I think he could be a really good bench piece, similar fashion to Andre that we talked about a minute ago, but I think for me that's what lets him down. It's purely down to his size. If he'd have been 6'8", he could have been a lottery pick. That's the margins we were talking about really when we get to the first round. So on to our next player, Travis Yeagle, a junior from Penn State. I mean, some people probably look at this and think, oh, you've put him far too high here, CoachFury. He's not as good as the other prospects you've been talking about. But for me, I really like him. He's 6'3". He obviously is a guard, so he's going to be limited to the 1 and 2 spot in the pro game. Ball handling is an absolute terrible nightmare for him. But, on paper, he can do a bit of everything. His court IQ discipline is okay. Court IQ, to be honest, needs to come up. Outside shot's okay. He can hit a free throw. Stealing, I can see him being one of those pesky sort of defensive guys who can make a shot. That's what I see him. Problem is his height is what lets him down again at 6'3". He's undersized still. So that's kind of why he drops. And then I guess the final thing to say is that you're looking at it probably and going, well, we only shoot 39% from the field goal. Yes, but he's been used massively wrong in my opinion. Travis Yeagle needs to be shooting 3-point shots. I mean, look, he's only taken 11 3-point shots in the entire season and made 54% of them. Granted, it's a very small sample size, but when your outside shot say 85, you got to give the guy the ball outside the 3.9 and let him hit it. Clearly, the system he was in was not the right fit for him, and I think if I was looking at it and I had a late first round pick, I would be seeing that and thinking, yeah, I could pick him up, quickly fix his preferences, get him efficient, and then he could look like a pretty good prospect. So we carry on moving on. Next up is Nick Moy, a freshman from Ohio State. So a guy who on paper is very raw. It's fair to say he's a great rebounder, good shot blocker, has an inside shot, passing is really, really good for a centre. Ball handling's terrible, free throw's terrible, discipline IQ is all terrible, defence is okay, but he's a freshman, so I taken into consideration that potential factor that I mentioned. Look, the ball handling should come up, defensive ability should come up, discipline will come up, IQ should come up, and his outside shot, to be honest with you, if he could get that from 47 to 60, given he's 6'7", and he's and his shooting numbers are suspect, I guess. For me, I feel like someone will take a punt on him just because of that potential factor. I think you look at him and you go 6'7", guy can rebound, block shots. Yeah, I can throw him in a couple of mismatches and see what happens. So that's why I've kind of put him a little bit higher than some of the other prospects we have talked about. Next up, we have Perry Willis. So a Xavier guard, 6'2". Again, he's undersized, but his ratings are starting to look a little bit better. Obviously, he's a junior, so he's a bit more developed. But, looking at it, his ball handling is very good. His passing is good. He's a good defender. His stealing's phenomenal. His shooting numbers are pretty good as well. Granted that his 3-point numbers need to improve, but that volume needs to improve, so it's very difficult to determine whether he actually is, is a good 3-point shooter or not. But I think he could be a nice little rotation guard for a team, and a cheap rotation guard given that the late first round salaries are pretty low. The only thing that really worries me about him, why he hasn't gone higher in my book, is just that court IQ. That court IQ for me, if I've got a guard in there who is a good passer and good ball handling like Perry Willis is, I'd want that to be, win at least 55 to 60. Anything beyond that is awesome. So that's why he kind of drops. But I think he's got some really good ratings that I think will mean he'll go in the first round at least. Next up we have is Justin Taylor from Florida. Another guy who's interesting on paper. Again, he is a senior, so he's more developed. His shooting numbers are pretty good. He's a 6'1" guard. I really, really like his outside shot though. 44% from outside. Yeah, put me down to get him. I would love to get him in a system. Granted, he's undersized, but he seems to have good defensive ability given his size. The only thing that worries me again is the court IQ. I think for me, if I was putting him in a system that I would like to run, I would put him in at the 2 guard and just play him an undersized 2. Probably from the bench, but I could see him developing. Granted he's a senior, so that development ceiling might be quite low. But if you get that court IQ up to 50, continue with that ball handling. The drawing fouls is really good for a guard as well, and that's something that drew me to him as well. And I think he's going to be a good prospect. I think Justin Taylor could be one of the first guys that we see in this first round that we're talking about who will get some decent minutes if he goes to the right team. Given that there's not that many good rotation guards off the bench in the pro game, in my opinion, and I could see him plodding his way in there because of that 3-point shooting number. He could be a really good undersized 3-and-D guard, in my opinion, going forward. And we carry on. Next up, we have Jeremy Wagner, who is a senior from Purdue. Again, on paper, looks tremendous. Looks tremendous prospect. Outside shooting's good. Scoring, passing, ball handling is all really good. 6'1", so he's slightly undersized. But he can rebound, he can play defense, he can steal, he can block shots. He's got the best court IQ we've seen so far from the guard situation in this first round. Discipline is awesome as well. The thing that terrifies me about him is that his shooting numbers. 33% from 3-point you can kind of get away with, but if you're shooting only 38% normally, that to me gives me a bit of a red flag to think, oh, he's probably not a lottery pick, he's probably a late first round pick. I think right situation, and if they fix his preferences here and maybe get him a little bit more on the outside, a little bit more, just those sort of jump shots running off the screens, he might be a good player. I think he might be one of those though that he'll come in already finished and polished and he won't be able to develop anything else in his game, and that's what worries me being a senior. So I think first round pick is probably going to be there for Jeremy Wagner. I'm not sure how long he'll last in the league though, as new players come in and international players, etc. So we carry on. Next up we have Kelsy Holmes. So a guy who's been a pain in my backside for Michigan this year. Phenomenal college player. There's no doubt about that. 20 and 10, 1.8 blocks, 1 steal, assist a game. Awesome. Really, really good college player. And you notice I say really, really good college player because I don't think he's going to be a good pro player. Great inside shot. Rebounding is amazing. Draw fouls so well. Really, really well. Defensive abilities all over the place. Like that is, if you want a defensive player who can make an inside shot and draw you fouls, perfect player. But he's 6'7", he's undersized, has no outside shot to speak of. Discipline, court IQ, athleticism are pretty terrible. Basically means, I know I've put him in the first round. I could see him dropping to second round, to be perfectly honest with you. He was one that I was really questioning, but I think his stats in college and the way he's been doing in the Big Ten, to me, probably thinks that the coaches in the pro game are probably going to look at him and take a punt just for that drawing foul ability. I mean, he's a guy that if I had him in the pro game, I would put him in there for between 8 to 10 minutes a game on whoever the best player is on the other team, because he can defend him in theory. Granted, he'll be undersized, but he can defend him and he'll draw fouls up against him. So he'll put the other team's best player in foul trouble. He's probably a really interesting prospect if you were to put him on someone like a Kevin Durant or a LeBron James. He'll be undersized, but he'd be like a sort of gritty player, and he might cause them into some foul issues. But I don't know if the AL will see that. For me, I would pay a first round pick for that type of player. If I was in a playoff team and I was looking for that type of thing, I'd certainly do it. But we'll see how it goes come draft day. Next up, we have Dionce Louis from Seton Hall. So a 6'2" guard. On paper, again, looks like a really good player. His shooting numbers are suspect, which is kind of the thing that's probably dropped him just outside the lottery, to be honest with you, at this point. We're looking at sort of that 17 to 20 range for him. But great scoring, good outside shot, plays defense, good stealing ability, good court IQ, draws fouls really well for a guard. He's got really good skill set for him. So I could see him probably going in that mid to late first round, if I'm honest. Needs to sort out that shooting number though. That's the thing that will scare most people off from taking him in the lottery, in my opinion. And the fact he's undersized again. But I could see him certainly going in the first round. And if we move on, we get to the draft lottery. So these are the players that I think will go in the draft lottery. And we'll just talk through why I think they're going to go there. But obviously, as I said, some of these guys may fall out of the lottery because there's international prospects, G League prospects, but we haven't kind of considered them in this preview. So first up, we have John Virgil, a senior from Missouri. For me, probably looking at that and you're probably going, why on earth is he being drafted in the lottery when you could look at some of the other players that we've just talked about? Well, for me, good outside shot, good defensive ability on paper to steal the ball. Discipline is very good. Honestly, I think that his numbers are pretty underrated. I think maybe he was at Missouri, he was a little bit hidden. For me, 38% from 3-point range, 45% overall, 6'5". He's a good size to play anywhere from the number 1 to the number sort of 3 position. So from point guard, shooting guard, small forward. Has outside shot, ball handling ability is good enough to play all those positions. So for me, I think he's a very versatile player, and that's why I think he will end up in the draft lottery in comparison to some of the other players we've talked about who may be a bit more one-dimensional than John Virgil. So next up we have Anthony Kyte from Notre Dame Fighting Irish, another senior. On paper, looks like a really, really good player. Good defensive ability all across the board. Ball handling is awesome for someone in that position of forward. Outside shot's good. Inside shot is definitely acceptable at this stage. Scoring is good. Passing is good. He's so versatile. He's 6'7". Shooting numbers on paper look awesome. Definite lock for a lottery pick. I just think he's got a good all-round game that any team would want to pick him up. The only question mark about him is that court IQ. But you can probably hide that a little bit with some of his other ratings that he's got. So that's why I think he is going to go in the lottery as well. Next up, we have Jermaine Bulman. So, a senior from Butler. You can see some of these lottery picks are kind of seniors. Well, again, similar sort of story, to be honest with you. A 6'8" forward, so he's good sized. Shooting numbers are really good. Granted, on paper, he's got some issues around discipline, court IQ. Again, that seems to be the common thing. Players in this draft seem to have really good discipline and court IQ and have some other holes, or they don't have that, and then they don't have holes in their actual game. But let me just throw this at you. 83 inside scoring, 78 outside scoring, 81 scoring, great defensive ability, draws fouls so well. For me, absolute lottery pick. You can, again, pick him up. You can play him within probably play him at small forward, power forward, and at centre in some small ball situations, and he'll be perfectly fine there. He's a really, really good. I think he'd be a really good stretch for, in my opinion. Probably not a starter from day one because that court IQ and discipline, but I could certainly see him building into being a starter if he carries on. At least gets those court IQ and disciplines up to the mid 40s. That'll probably be good enough. But I'd want him shooting a little bit more of the outside ball as well going forward. But I'm really excited about his prospect in the pro game, certainly because of that size and because of that shooting ability that he has. Next up, we have Laurent Carter from Dayton Flyers. So another senior, but on paper, again, looks like a really good player. 6'8". You see the kind of the trend in the lottery is very much size and ability. Outside shooting, inside scoring is not as good, but the numbers are kind of indicating he could be okay at both, despite those numbers. Great defensive ability, scoring, passing, stealing, blocking, discipline, court IQ, all slightly higher than Bulman that we just looked at. So for me, that's why I've got him slightly higher, because whilst the shooting's not there, the numbers are there in terms of volume and percentage, which to me indicate that maybe his shooting is better than being indicated in the ratings. So for me, I think Carter is going to be a lottery pick and get a similar kind of story, really. I think he'd be a good stretch for, probably he's more suited to playing the small forward than the previous candidates we've looked at. Next up, we have Jasper Taylor. So 6'7", forward from Wisconsin, who has got some question marks, but I think if you've got a guy who's got 400s in inside shooting, scoring, rebounding, and 91 shot block, and defensive ability is all there, it's kind of hard to not pass him up in the lottery, really. Average 14, 11, just under 2 blocks a game, just under 1.5 steals per game. I think he's going to be an interesting prospect. He's a junior, so he's got a gap to develop, unlike some of the other prospects we've looked at in the lottery so far. So I could see that discipline, court IQ coming up, that drawing fouls, ball handling ability coming up. Outside shot is 54, needs to come up. But for me, again, similar kind of thing. I could see him playing small forward and power forward quite comfortably in the pro league. And I think if you've got a guy who's that elite in inside scoring and rebounding, and you are a good size to play multiple positions, that makes a real interesting matchup nightmare if you are in the pro league. So we continue on. We've got Demar Fletcher next, a junior from Providence. So a guy who, again, 6'6" is an interesting prospect. Shooting ability is pretty good. He's got a good outside shot. The ball handling means he's probably going to be limited to playing shooting guard and small forward, and maybe the occasional minute at power forward in a small ball situation. But apart from that, his court IQ is questionable. But everything else on paper looks really good. I like his rebounding. I like his scoring. I like his passing is really good. I like his stealing ability. And the numbers are all there for him. 44% from field goal, 34% from 3-point. That should naturally come up as a junior. He should continue to develop, get that outside shot better. That 40 inside shot was also something that interests me, because that's a pretty good for someone of his position as well. So I could certainly see him being taken in the lottery. Carrying on, we have senior Andre Emmanuel from Memphis. So the guy is just, on paper, just looks phenomenal. 20 and 8 and 1.5 steals per game in his numbers. 54% field goal, 32% from 3-point. So again, he's one of those that he's got some gaps in his discipline and court IQ, but not enough to really necessarily worry me because some of the other things are so strong. For example, his inside shot, his rebounding, passing, handling, drawing fouls, all of that to me screams like a lottery pick. I think he'll be a guy who you can comfortably put in at power forward to begin with and probably start him and see how you get on. I mean, I'd want that discipline to go up slightly if it was me personally, but for me, I think he's a guy you can just give the ball into the post and he can make things happen because he can either hit open men, he can either take the shot inside, or he actually does have the ability to stretch out and hit a shot outside if you do need him to. Also with the drawing fouls ability, you've got a bit of everything on that sense, and he can play great defense. So definitely a lottery pick in my opinion. Next up we have David Walker, the guard from VA Commonwealth Rams. So why have I got him here, 6'1" guard above some of the other guards that we've talked about previously? It's pretty simple. He doesn't have any flaws, to be honest with you. The guy can pass, he can handle, his court IQ is one of the highest, discipline's good, athleticism's awesome, scoring ability, outside shot, it's all there. He can play defense as well. Only thing that worries me is that his volume in terms of 3-point percentage wise, 33% is a bit of a question mark. You probably want that to come up a little bit, but that's something you can work on given he is a freshman. That being said, some of the other guards that we've looked at also are not freshmen, so he's probably the best prospect in terms of ceiling that we've talked about going so far in terms of the guards, because he is a freshman. He's already got most of the things you would want from a guard going forward. So for me, David Walker I've got down as a lottery pick. I could easily see him going probably inside the top 10. I think that's where he'll end up. I think someone will fall in love with him at that sort of potential and will just snap him up. So next up we have Brian Felix, who was a really, really tough decision over him. On paper, again, similar to Walker, interesting prospect, slightly taller than Walker. He's got a couple of other gaps though. Court IQ, discipline slightly lower. Drawing fouls is awesome. Ball handling's all fine. Defense is there. Passing's there. The actual shooting numbers are better than Walker. So that's kind of why I've put him above him. He's one of those that I had a really tough decision about whether putting him in the top 5 or not. Because for me, I could see him going in the top 5 because given the fact he's a freshman, that discipline IQ should improve over time. And he has everything else. But there were some other guys that I felt probably are slightly even more ready now, who might have more of an impact, or maybe have a bit of a higher ceiling than Brian Felix. Really, probably one of the toughest decisions I had with the entire draft was really where to place Brian Felix. I think I wouldn't be surprised if he goes in the top 5. Given that top 5 of the CBGM players, let's say that, rather than just including the international G League guys that we haven't really seen. But I would certainly be surprised if he falls outside the top 10, and I'd be absolutely flabbergasted if he falls outside the top 20, to be honest with you. Really, really good prospect, Brian Felix, in my opinion. So that moves us on to the top 5. Let's have a look and see who we've got. So in at 5, we have Kyte Willi, the Kansas City senior. Phenomenal player. Outside shot's great, 6'3". He's got everything on paper that Felix doesn't quite have. Given the fact that he's a senior, you kind of expect that. But I really like his shooting numbers. I think he's already proven that he's got some of the things that Felix hasn't got in terms of his ability to make shots, his ability in terms of assists, steals, etc. So for me, Kyte Willi, top 5 pick. I'd be excited to get him. That shot blocking ability also for a guard is just really interesting. It really intrigues me. But I really like his scoring, his passing, his ball handling, rebounding, stealing, and all the shooting numbers are all there. So for me, he could come in, and I think he could be a starter from day one. Probably not in a playoff team, but probably from a team that's building. If you need that guard to handle the ball and start with the basis in the backcourt, Kyte Willi could certainly do that. So at number 4, we have Jim Davis from Pittsburgh. So Jim Davis is another guy who I'm genuinely quite excited about actually in the NBGM. A junior, so he's got a ceiling. Let's remember that first. But inside and outside shot is really good. Really difficult to tell with the outside shot how efficient it is because he hasn't really taken any. So that's something to bear in mind. That a pro team will have to basically let him hit a 3-point shot and see what happens. But defensive rebounding is awesome. Shot blocking is awesome. Great, just a great defender. Court IQ is good. Discipline's a bit of a gap for him. But I really like the fact that he is 6'9", 261 pounds. So you can easily mould him into pretty much either an undersized centre, or he could play anywhere from small forwards to centre, to be honest with you. And given the fact he's a junior, I think that potential is there to develop that. If you could get his outside shot to 80, court discipline to about 45, and maybe get the ball handling up a little bit to like the 30s, you could have a really, really good starter on your hands there in Jim Davis. So for me, I have him down as a top 5 pick. I have him down as 4th overall at the minute. So number 3, Gary Oliver, a sophomore from Texas Longhorns. In my opinion, the guy has actually gone massively underrated in the CBGM. I've not heard him in any conversations talking about some of the top players in the league, and I really just don't understand why. Really just a really good scorer. Can score inside, can score outside. Rebounding abilities there. The defensive abilities average, but to be honest with you, I can live with that. Court IQ discipline is the only thing that's really, really letting him down. And I think that's the only thing that's really worries me about putting him down as the 3rd pick in the draft, is just those 2 things. But given he's 6'6", and he's a good size, good weight, good shooting numbers, good scoring ability, for me, you could take him. He'd be the perfect 6-man scoring in a really good team, in my opinion. Comes in, he's guaranteed to get you a bucket, and he's not going to lose you anything on defense. So for me, Gary Oliver, top 3 in the list of CBGM players for this draft. So at 2nd, we have Kenny Lyons from Gonzaga, the freshman. And well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it, really, when you look at him? I mean, shooting numbers are a bit questionable, but on paper, he's got everything developing in the right way. So his defensive ability is already there. His scoring, passing, draw handling, draw foul ability is all there. Inside outside shot is still developing, but it's already there, and it's already good enough. Discipline court IQ is obviously an issue for him. He needs to get that and develop that very quickly. But given he's a freshman, I would expect that to develop fairly quick. So for me, he's already put up phenomenal numbers on a good team in the CBGM. And I fully expect him to go in the top 5. And I have him as 2nd overall in this one. If I was drafting him, first thing I would do is make sure that I can definitely get his numbers sorted out so that he is more of a 45-46% shooter. Be it going inside and using that draw foul ability, or taking those outside shots. I'd have to marry that up. I wouldn't be too worried about the discipline and court IQ, because you can kind of sometimes hide that, especially if he's so good at drawing fouls on the opposition. It's kind of a bit of a battle of attrition there. Defensive ability doesn't necessarily worry me, because he's 6'7", good size. I can pretty much plug him in anywhere from shooting guard all the way down to power forward, in my opinion, with that ball handling ability certainly, and his ability to grab rebound, block shots, steal the ball, etc. So for me, number 2 on my list. So number 1 on the list for me is Damian Brown from Kentucky, a 6'10" centre coming out of the draft. 19, 11, 2, 1.2 steals per game. For me, the best centre in the draft, just by size, by ability. Inside shots phenomenal. He draws fouls so well. Great defensive ability. Discipline court IQ is definitely a bit of a concern. But as I've said, given the fact he's a sophomore, I expect that to naturally develop. It's probably a little bit underscored because he is still so young. But for me, 51% inside, he is just a guy you could basically build your front court around. He's going to be a great defender. He's going to be right size. He's going to draw fouls. He's going to be an absolute nuisance. And I didn't even mention the fact that he's got great passing ability and ball handling ability. So when I look at him, and see probably someone like, who do I see him in terms of NBA comparison? Who do I see him as? I mean, probably. Let's have a think. So let me think. Probably like a Nikola Jokic is what I see him as. Maybe a little bit Nikola Jokic light, where he doesn't have that court IQ yet. If that court IQ gets up to the 60s range with that passing ability, he is a phenomenal point centre. Phenomenal. And for me, if I had the first round pick and I'd looked at anything else, obviously, as I've said, I've factored in my biases here. I would certainly take him, because I could take him. I know for a fact that I could put him in at starting at centre, and I don't have to worry about a position for at least 4 years, because he's going to be able to hold that down. I just need to build guys around him who can score, guys around him who can handle the ball, and basically run. I can run an offense for him as well if I wanted to. And I'd work to get that core IQ up. So for me, Damian Brown is my number one prospect in the CBGM going into the NBGM draft. Interested to hear what you guys think. Do you guys agree with this assessment? As I've said, there's obviously a lot of biases in there and a lot of things that we've not been able to factor in because we haven't seen much of the pro game yet. We haven't seen the conference tournaments. But interested to hear what you think. Do you guys have any other one? If I missed a guy off who you think should be going inside the top 10, inside the first round, always interested to hear your thoughts. But we'll probably come back near draft time and maybe do a little bit more of a summary recap once we get the mocks from the NBGM and we get a view of how that looks. Maybe we'll do a bit more of just a lottery style first round and see if any shakers and moves have happened because of the national tournaments. But it's been an absolute blast. It's been really good fun to try and just delve through some of this, because as you can see, there's so many prospects in the CBGM have declared, so many seniors, and it's really hard to just marry that up into what is basically 60 players entering, getting drafted. But it's a real tough challenge, and just shows you how difficult it is if this is all you've got to go off in terms of some raw numbers and some basic stats from college, how difficult it is for anyone to draft a player. But really enjoyed it. Interested to hear your thoughts, and I'm sure we'll be back with more coverage over the rest of the national tournament and the off season and the NBGM going forward now. And let's see. We'll see where all these guys go, and we'll see how accurate I am or not, whether the AI has a completely different mindset than I do.